122 days until Penn State takes on Marshall at Beaver Stadium to kick off the 2026 college football season in State College. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel from BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. It's the Wednesday, May 6th edition of BWI Live. Penn State is obviously through spring ball. Nittany Lions focusing on recruiting right now with the coaching staff on the road. Our focus today is going to be on a little bit of everything, including what we learned during spring ball. We're going to take a look at which players in our mind got better during the first 15 practices of the Matt Campbell era at Penn State. We're going to get into a little 2027 NFL draft talk fresh off the heels of Vega Awani going first in the first round of the 2026 NFL draft and 8 players being drafted from the 2025 Penn State roster. There's a lot of questions out there about whether Penn State's pretty sustained and consistent run of putting anywhere between 6 and 8, sometimes 9 players into the NFL year over the last decade plus will sustain. And then we'll get into some best bets and focus on the Penn State 2026 season later in the show. T. Frank, good morning, pal. How we doing?
Oh, I have been better. Right before the show started, I have 2 monitors here. So, I'm shooting right down the barrel between the camera and these 2 monitors. And the one over here, which I monitor things on and I, use as a supplementary thing, just fell over. Just fell over on my desk. And I was already behind today. So, we're having it's a bumpy takeoff, but we're in the air. And I get the sense, more behind the scenes. I come up with a rundown for this show today. I stack the conversation about what I think we should talk about and how I think it all fits together. And I get the sense from our conversation today, Greg, and then that intro, that you don't really see the through line. And that's probably fair. Is that fair? Not quite, because here's what we're focused on. It's not necessarily looking ahead at the 2027 NFL draft. It's using the draft and the players we are talking about now to judge how good the teams are on Penn State's schedule and how good Penn State could be based on the players that we could see in the consensus big board next year. So that's kind of the idea. It's not necessarily about the draft next year. We're not doing it way too early. We are looking at the way too early and the players that are being talked about right now to gauge strength of schedule and Penn State's talent on this particular roster. So we didn't get a chance to talk about that because my computer self-destructed right before the show, and the thing that allows me to turn on ads didn't work this morning. So we're doing it live. We're doing it live.
I don't call it BWI Live for nothing. You mentioned a bumpy takeoff. We got C. Griffey in the chat is somewhere on a plane over North Carolina. Hope your takeoff was better than ours this morning, and let's hope your landing is too. Good morning to everyone in the chat. A couple of you mentioning to like and subscribe to the video. Please always do that for us, and we appreciate that. And you guys being here with us, whether you're live on Wednesday, May 6th, or in the chat later here on YouTube, or of course listening on the podcast version as well. I'm going to kick off the conversation today with a look at the Penn State defensive line. So a lot of springs, T. Frank, I feel like we've come out of the first 2-3 weeks following spring ball talking receivers. Yeah. And there's been a fair amount of receiver conversation. There's no doubt about that. But I do feel like in this particular spring, there's been a lot of talk about the defensive line and particularly the defensive ends and the specificness of that being where Penn State stands in that room under first-year edge rushers coach Christian Smith. There's no, at least in terms of production, Abdul Carter or Micah Parsons or Eter Gross-Matos returning from the 2025 Penn State team to lead this position group in 2026, which is interesting in and of itself. Are there guys who have that kind of potential? Yes, but I'd have to go back and look. But I think it's the first time in quite some time, T. Frank, we're talking about this defensive ends room as completely about potential as opposed to here is star 1 and then here's possibly star 2. And then here are the guys who could be in the depth conversation. We're talking about it all this spring.
The last time we were in this situation, was it 21 with Chop Robinson or 22 with Chop Robinson, where he was behind Nick Tarburton? And so there was a real confusion about there's a real concern about who would be the guy to apply pressure, and then he kind of burst onto the scene in his first year with Penn State.
Yeah, I think it was 21, but I have to go back and double check that. Either way, point being, it's definitely been a couple years since this conversation was being had. Penn State does return Ivan Kamaju. It welcomes Ike Eziogo in from Iowa State, the oldest player by quite a bit in that Penn State defensive end room. Alec McPherson transfers in from Colorado after playing, I think, in 10 or 11 games, somewhere in that ballpark during his freshman season. Max Granville returns from missing an entire season due to injury and got plenty of praise for what Penn State's new coaching staff has seen on film from him. But obviously he did not have much going on this spring as he continues to work his way back. So I think the overall, before we get into some of the nitty gritty, the overall point here is it's just more questions than answers at this point. And a lot of those answers might get some of them in fall camp, but I think a good chunk of them aren't going to come until this season's a little bit underway.
Yeah, and so I was just curious. And by the way, if you want to read Greg's article where he talked to Christian Smith, check it out at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You can subscribe right now for just $1 and get access to that for a couple of days where you can check us out. You can read some of the premium content. You can get all of the information from all the articles that we're going to be discussing today and adding more context to. What was kind of his general vibe when you were talking to him? What was his, I know those are the words he says on the page that you reported and you put in, in your article, but how does he sound about the room in terms of hope or concern with all the things you just laid out there?
Yeah, I think hope is a good word, and I don't want it to sound like they're just hoping and praying, because that's not what I'm trying to say here when I'm talking about hope, but just hope that this group continues to take the steps he saw it take in the spring, because, of course, you can make a lot of progress over 15 practices in March and April, but if you don't find a way to make it when you get to August and the time is really of the essence to get ready for the fall, then what you did in the spring, it won't hurt, but it's not going to help as much as it maybe could have. So that was the vibe I got from him. Very similar to, Rocco Beck. The one quote that I keep coming back to from spring, and this is probably because I was writing about the receivers this morning, but Rocco Beck talking about consistency among the next group of receivers for Penn State. So you have the guys from Iowa State at the top, obviously. And then the consistency is the key for these younger guys, whether it's Kobe Howard, whether it's Zay Robinson, whether it's Karan Brookins. It's all about consistency, doing it day in and day out at the level that they've shown that they can flash at. And I think it's the same conversation for these defensive ends. I think that with Eziogo, I really think the transition from a 3-3-5 to a 4-3, I think there's a reason why Matt Campbell was so effusive in the praise that he gave him for flashing this spring, because I think that's a huge difference for him. He talked about being up. He talked about being up, and I didn't talk about this as much in this particular article because we focused on the young guys, but Eziogo talked about being up to like 285. And a couple years ago, he was playing at 270 and felt better at that weight. And so he's obviously, of course, with playing defensive end back down towards that weight. Yeah. And so, he's had a really nice spring. But, yeah, I think it can't just be him, right? And we saw Ivan Kamaju do some very nice things last season. There's a reason that Penn State fought as hard as it did to keep him on its roster, and it expects him to take another big step forward. McPherson's a guy who, anytime I've brought up to anyone this idea that there's not a lot of snaps and production returning for this group overall, they point to McPherson immediately and say, don't forget about what he did at Colorado. And so he does. What's that?
It's interesting.
Yes,
because
it is.
He was also not a starter at Colorado. Now, he worked his way into the rotation and was a big part of it, but I mean, that is experience, and he is a guy that's been on the field. So I'm seriously not trying to discredit that, but they have one true starter coming back this year.
So I think that's kind of the point, right? There's nobody else to point to and make that case except for McPherson. Yeah. So that's why he's the first guy that comes up. And I understand the pushback a little bit, but it's still, you look at it and you say to yourself, okay, if these guys play to the level that it looks like they can based on what we knew about them as recruits, based on what we've seen, be it in practice or games so far, Penn State will be okay. And to the point you made about looking back at the Chop Robinson, Nick Tarburton days a number of years ago, just because it looks like a concern now doesn't mean it will be come the fall. And I do trust Anton Lynn to put these guys in position to do what they do best, rush the passer and get help from the defensive tackles. So I don't want to sit here and just make it be an end-all, be-all disaster for the defensive end room. However, I did think it was just interesting to get a feel for where these young guys are. And, Kamaju and McPherson, when I was talking to Christian Smith, I don't remember if they were asked about in conjunction with each other or separately, but either way, he talked about them together. Those are clearly two guys who, once you get past Eziogu, like they're the first two guys that are going to make up this rotation. And then from there, it's just all about who earns snaps. Max Granville, where does he put himself into this once he's healthy come fall camp? You talk about LeVar Arrington II. Makes the position switch. I think he's raw without question. They like what they've seen from him so far, but at the same time, he's a first-year defensive end who really is not a first year is a bit misleading. First spring defensive end, 15 practice defensive end.
Yeah.
And so certainly adding weight will be a part of the conversation with him this summer, and that will help determine what role he'll have this season. But yeah, there's just a lot that looks good on paper, looks good on film, and you can imagine it looking good in the fall. There's also not a lot of real tangible things. None of that is, certainly a little bit of it's tangible in terms of the film and the stats from last year. But a good chunk of this room overall is just that if you're a Penn State fan, if you're Penn State, you're looking for the hope of what these guys could be and the potential of what they could be, turning it into production on the field in the fall.
Yeah. Dan Lynn mentioned halfway through spring that they weren't blitzing because they wanted these guys to rush the passer and see who could rush the passer. And then we did see them do a little bit of blitzing during blue-white game practice. And so I'm curious, just hadn't had a chance to talk to Dan Lynn to follow up and see, hey, how'd that go? Who in the end is one of these guys that you felt like was consistently out there? And then Ivan Kamaju wasn't consistently out there. So two of your top athletic forward pass rushers weren't out there in the spring for either the whole of it or a good portion of it. So it's certainly the toughest one to read of the entire offense or defense. I think it's the toughest position to read, which is why I wanted to talk about it to start the show today.
Yeah, and I just think that will continue to be the case because even I think it would be insightful to get that info on which guys stood out, but at the same time, spring can be tough because you're live in practice for so few reps all year long. But certainly in spring, you're not as live for as many as you might be in the fall, getting ready for the season. So even that makes it tough because you can't hit the quarterback. And if you even get remotely close to the quarterback, you might be taking a couple laps. And so I think it can make it tough to evaluate that position, which also might be part of the reason that it's unfair to have too much criticism of it. Because at the same time, you can't sit here and acknowledge that reality of what these guys are trying to do, rush to passer, and what they're trying to avoid in spring, hitting the quarterback, don't really jive together and lead to necessarily the reviews that maybe you would get in the summer when these guys are out there scrimmaging frequently and things like that. So that's our thoughts on the defensive line. This is BWI Live for May 6th. I'm Greg Pickel. T. Frank will be back in just a moment as we get into a conversation about the continued spring fallout and which Penn State players improved most this spring. It's going to be a little bit different than our stock up, stock down segment from last week's show. We're going to focus, number one, all on the positive, but number two, look at some different position groups and some different players and look and see the way you phrase this, T. Frank, I thought it was a good way to put it, but we're not necessarily going for the players that were the best, the players that got the most buzz, the players that were talked about the most, all of that stuff. Doesn't have to be the best players on the team. It's the guys who we noticed taking steps or have reported have taken steps between practice 1, March 24, and the blue-white practice a couple Saturdays ago.
Yeah, and I just think it's important to not put everything in win-loss categories, right? Of the pressure of who's winning a position battle or who's got stock up, stock down, but more just spring practice for a lot of these guys is just about getting better, whether it's within the defense or whether it is, if you're a new player or a young player taking those steps and integrating where you don't even have to be in the conversation, but guys who just stood out as that they got better in camp and maximized their opportunity. Celebrating growth is always a good thing, I think that's a thing that we sometimes forget to do. And I asked around to get some perspective on this because, obviously we were there for 3 of the 15 practices. Right. So I thought it was a good exercise just in who took the steps they needed to this spring, regardless of whether or not they're going to be in the 2 deep.
Yes, and of course the depth chart still being figured out, but Sean Fitz has a look at that over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You can check that out, $1 to join. Try us out, recruiting intel, transfer news, all the things that come with Penn State football, Penn State basketball, Penn State wrestling. We have you covered. All right, T. Frank, let's get into your first one here on the list. It's a Penn State linebacker who is new to Penn State and also knew, well, I actually talked to him after the Blue-White game, and he said the last time he played in the 4-3 was in high school, which is going to be the case for not every linebacker on this team, but any of the ones that came from Iowa State. Certainly that will be the case. You put Cooper Ebel here. Why?
Well, for that reason, a guy coming from a 3-3-5 where he was used sometimes as a defensive lineman and just generally had less cover, had to win more one-on-ones, direct contact with guards to get into the backfield and make plays. And he did so at Iowa State, but it's just a harder situation. So coming over from that system, being the leader, like being the green dot signal caller, he's the guy that improved the most this offseason from people I spoke with. And I think that's a really big thing for your defensive, like the centrifuge around everything spins around the middle linebacker from the coverage to the front. And he's got to be dialed in, telling everybody what to do and getting everybody lined up. And for him to take those personal steps forward, I think is really important. Now, does that mean he's going to be the best linebacker on the team? No, I don't think so. We'll get to more on that later. But with Ebel, you need to have that stability in the middle. And that transition could be very hard, right? And I think it was something that he took to really well and has been getting a lot of praise for it since then. So that's why Cooper Ebel is at the top of the list, because, kind of it was the most vocal praise for him. And from what we saw in spring where he was, it's interesting. We actually got to see him play Will linebacker and not Mike linebacker during the blue-white practice. So getting experience at a lot of different places as well.
Is your read on that, and I think it's fairly obvious to me, but I want to confirm with you in your mind, 4-2-5, when Penn State goes to it, it's him and Tony Rojas on the field?
I think so, yeah. And I do, so yes. The answer there is yes, but there will be a healthy rotation with Caleb Bacon. I do think that's that if you have all three of them on the field, no problem. But Rojas would be the guy, and then you'd have Bacon rotating in. I suspect they're going to find a way to make sure all those guys get starting reps, with the air quotes on the field. But yes, like he's the guy in the middle. He's the Mike. And
are you suggesting that they might introduce all of them as starters on the video board before the game? We've never seen Penn State introduce 26 of them before a game. I'm just kidding.
I actually don't get that from Matt Campbell. I think there will be 11 starters. There might be 12 because they might want the nickel out there too. Because even on some depth charts, they list 12 starters because of the importance of that position. But yeah, I don't think there's going to be 13 starters so that everyone feels good and doesn't want to transfer.
Yeah, I don't get that sense either. But at any rate, I do think you're right that when you look at that linebacker group, I think those three you mentioned, are going to play a starter number of reps. Now, will it ebb and flow depending on who you're playing? Yes. And we heard Lynn this offseason talk about the fact that, he is very adaptive to who they're playing, and he's obviously had to adapt in conferences, going from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten and from USC to Penn State even, making that transition. And so they will mix and match, of course, as required to deal with the personnel on the field. So there might be some games where not all three of those guys get starter-level reps, but I do think there's, without injury, of course, or anything else crazy going on, by the end of the season when we do that final PFF snap count review, I would suspect that those guys are probably all fairly close together and also leading that linebacker room.
Yeah, I think that's right. The conversation about the depth in this room is interesting because for me, the thing I'm looking at most with the depth is who are the guys for 2027? Right, because I don't know that there's enough snap. We're already talking about, are there enough snaps for these guys for this year with that top three, and then do you get up enough in games that you can put Alex Tash out there, or are you in a position where Cale Brazina can come in and play the mic and can take some of those snaps off of these guys, especially off of Ebel, just as a preservation tactic over like. Last year, they were trying to figure out, do they have enough depth to get through the season? Spoiler alert, they did not have enough depth to get through the season. I think they got enough depth to get through this season, especially when you've got some of those guys that we've talked about this spring. It's really, to me, they're in a good position of, okay, so now who are the three guys for next year and who can be a part of that conversation early? It's a good place to be in for the linebacker room.
Yeah, I think so too. And you have Tyson Veet, the first-year linebackers coach, and Dan Connor obviously assisting him, the linebacker U legend as well. So good coaching. Looks like a good depth situation for the linebackers. And if things go as planned, they're going to have at least a top 3 to work with at the start of fall camp. Got to get Tony Rojas healthy, of course, and keep him healthy. And that will be certainly goal number 1 for everybody at Penn State. I'm going to take the conversation to the other side of the ball, T. Frank, and I am going to go out of order from my list, but that's okay. This show's a little out of order at times. I am going to go with center Brock Riker, the Penn State newcomer, Texas State transfer. And the reason I went with him, T. Frank, is I was going through some audio from the spring last night. I was trying to figure out a way to work this quote into today's show from Cooper Cousins. And then when you put this topic on the rundown, I thought it was going to be the perfect way to do it. So he was asked about Rocco Beck being an effective leader. And then a little bit later, Brock Riker came up. And Cooper Cousins said that he made a big leap. A lot of other cliche stuff that you would hear from a teammate talking about both a new teammate and also the guy he lines up to on the first team, of course, as Cooper Cousins, the guard, is talking here. But he said he's done a really good job with the camaraderie. He's done a really good job of just talking to everybody for being a new guy, especially in the system, just helping everybody out. He's done a phenomenal job, and he's made a huge leap. And I think the key there is not just the words from Cooper Cousins, because he wasn't going to sit in the Beaver Stadium media room and tell us that Brock Riker was terrible this spring, and that he took a huge step back, and that he came to you are muted, my friend, but that he was not. Yeah. So, but point being is that between that and some other things we've heard this spring and just watching the blue-white practice, I still can't emphasize enough that he's going to have to fend off a presumably healthy Dom Rowley to win the center job. That competition is going to play out. It is not Brock Riker penned in stone at center on the Penn State depth chart right now. But like we talked about either last week or 2 weeks ago, when you look at guys who probably separated themselves as much as they could on the depth chart, and when you're talking about a guy like Brock Riker, who was there for all 15 spring practices, and a guy like Dom Rowley, who was not, this is not earth-shattering news I am revealing here, but certainly the gap he put between those two is probably pretty considerable based on what we've heard. And I don't think there's any question he improved this spring and certainly caught the respect of his teammates and his coaches.
Yeah, and a guy who has a lot of room to grow, too, physically and in his position. So that's a factor that's important as well, of like guys who can improve. It's interesting that Cooper Ebel, a guy that has as much time on the field as he has, is one of our best and most improved guys. The situation, the scheme are a huge part of that. And then you got Brock Riker on the other end of the spectrum, being a younger player who is, in his second year starting at center in a new scheme, being on that side as well, who had a lot of room to grow and then did that growing. So two different ways to go about it to start us off.
Yeah. So, all right, let's stay on the offensive side of the ball with your second pick here. You focus on the running back room, another position group we talked a lot about. I wrote something over at Blue White Illustrated this morning looking at the kind of positives, negatives, thoughts, questions, concerns about this group. And I think we're probably going to be in line what you say here and what I wrote there. But why did the running backs make this list for you, T. Frank?
They're the most publicly talked about group that improved the most during spring. So we talked about all the way back in February, the conversation that Matt Campbell had when he talked about James Peoples and he talked about Quentin Martin and, how they fit into the program of Peoples being a guy who's in an entirely new situation and a new scheme. So he's got a lot to adapt to. And by the end of the season, Matt Campbell highlights him as one of the most improved players that stood out during spring ball after the blue-white practice. And, maybe that is something that's like top of mind because he had a good run in the game, but he talked about him the week before as well. So like he gained steam during camp. And then we go back and talk about Quentin Martin, and a guy who, on this show, we spent too much time talking about like, hey, how dedicated in the weight room has he been? How dedicated to gaining weight has he been? Because there was some false flags out there about he's 205 pounds on the depth chart. Clearly he's bigger than that in person now, and got, has received praise internally, externally from people in the program as to the development he's had whenever we ask about him, and was another guy that Matt Campbell talked about. And then you saw it in person. Like he ran over some dudes in the blue-white practice, which I thought was like a really notable thing specifically for Q, because if you're watching here on the YouTube channel, running through contact and the size and the power necessary to do what you just saw there watching him in the spring game last year, he did not have that. Like, he had multiple opportunities where he met a guy in the hole and got stonewalled. Here, he meets a guy in the hole and drags 3 or 4 of them down into the red area. That's a really exciting thing for Quentin Martin, who has the size and he has the athleticism to be a complete back. But he needed to put in that, the strength and the power behind his pads. So all of this is a huge development. I was skeptical of this group because they had some things they needed to prove, and here we are at the end of camp, and they've proved it. So that's a very good thing for Penn State football, and the opportunity to bring balance to the room, I think, is huge. Have I totally glitched? Greg, are you there? His face is moving. Greg, you're muted? What is going? Okay, so let's go on.
It's
to
a
my
little
next
bit
one.
of everything. Everything froze, everything muted, but now we're back and we're ready to rock and roll. At least I was able to hear what you were saying, even though I was unable to respond to it very briefly. No, I'm right there with you. I think that one of the things about this running backs room is that you have to, I think it's going to be very easy, especially potentially in the fall, to want to make continued comparisons to what Penn State had when Nick Singleton and Katron Allen were at Penn State. I'm not saying for you or for me, but I think it's, especially if the room maybe isn't as productive out of the gates, that there's going to want to be that comparison. I think you have to move past that, number one, because these guys are just different. It is a different group. It's a 3-headed monster at this point. Going back to Cooper Cousins, another guy he talked about was James Peoples, said there's not an ounce of fat on his body, and he can really boogie. Whatever that means. He said he's very shifty. He can really make guys miss is what he was getting at, of course. So there is excitement, and there is certainly positivity about that room that's going to be led by Carson Hansen. But I think you're right to put him here. I think that when you look at what that group, just from what we saw and heard about it this spring, it is a bunch of guys who are making an impact on this offense in different ways. And it's not necessarily, I guess maybe to some extent you could have some thunder and lightning comparisons, but I feel like it's going to be some different adjectives might be needed to describe the impact and way that these 3 guys make a dent on this offense in the fall. Yeah,
and so I think it's a spectrum, right, of physical runner or consistent runner, guy who wins with vision and all those things we've talked about when we talk about Carson Hansen, and then right in the middle of explosive but strong, elusive, all those things is Carson Hansen, and then on the far end, the traits guy who's got the height, weight, speed, is Quentin Martin. So you have a really good spectrum of talents in the backfield that I think overlap and complement each other. And most of them are really good receivers too, who are good in the passing game. I don't know at this point, what some of these guys do as blockers. Carson Hansen's a pretty good blocker from what I've seen on film. So you've got they complement each other in a good way where you don't have too much of the same thing, which I think we've seen. Even if you got good backs, if you don't have some of the complementary skills that you have, like a composite complete back in the backfield, that could be a problem for some teams. And you don't have that with this particular group.
Right. No, I think you're right there. And I think it is important to remember, too, not to go too far in one direction or the other, because at the same time, much like the conversation we had earlier about the receivers, about the defensive ends, the younger guys, Quentin Martin and James Peoples are 2 former 4-star recruits who have each had flash moments during their college careers. Martin, when he first got the opportunity to actually play in the Pinstripe Bowl against Clemson, and then Peoples in a couple different instances during his time at Ohio State. Both of these guys, though, if they're going to reach the potential that we thought they would have coming out of high school and that Penn State thought they had by keeping them on this 2026 roster, are going to have to do it consistently. Cannot just be one-offs here and there. And we've heard consistency issues, of course, in the past. So that's the big thing to me. It sounds great right now, and I have no doubt these guys improved. At the same time, come fall, that improvement is going to – it can't just steady off where it left it in the spring.
It's a great point.
Continue and keep stepping up for those guys to reach the point we think they can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the growth now does not mean that it is guaranteed in the future. Yeah, past results don't predict future outcomes.
All right, so Josiah Zayas is the next guy up on my list, Penn State defensive back, a true freshman. And, in the vein that we started this conversation with, of it's not necessarily the best guys on the team, I don't necessarily see a path for him to the field. 5 for 5 in college sports could change that, where there's no more red shirts and you simply get 5 seasons to play. 5 years to play 5 seasons, and however it shakes out, it shakes out. So I put him on this list because he certainly made improvement this spring once he started working full-time at safety in a room where you have Marcus Neal, who's going to lead the way. You have 2 Iowa State transfers who didn't seem to do a whole heck of a lot this spring, as far as I could tell. And then you have a number of other guys who are going to be fighting for reps behind them or even with them. So I think that safety room is fascinating. I'm not saying Zayas is going to start, of course, or even play a rotational role. But at the same time, I would be hard-pressed to think that when they're looking back through expectations versus reality, certainly what we saw at the blue-white practice, but also previously at Penn State spring practice, that it's a guy who took steps forward in his first spring about, I don't even know, 3 months since he got on campus.
Yeah. So it's funny. I've got another guy in the secondary as well at the same position. Amarian Davis from Boston College, the transfer who came into Penn State as kind of a under-the-radar acquisition when they're bringing in all the Iowa State guys, and you don't maybe focus on some of the other long-term pickups they made from a redshirt freshman, I think he was last year. He's a great, there are players you watch on film that you just get really excited about because they play the way in a game that subconsciously you've seen before at the highest level, where there's that aggression and the explosive movement skills that make a guy into what everybody wants out of a football player. If you're a defender, somebody who's going to be fearless through contact and make plays, even if you don't have all of the physical skills to make, highlight hits and jacked up highlights and stuff like that. Amarian Davis had all those things last year, and now he's 197, close to 200 pounds. He's got good coverage skills for his size and is a guy that got better this spring. So, again, another guy that is not necessarily going to be in the conversation this year, especially when Jeremiah Cooper re-enters the chat, whenever that is. He's assumed to be part of this two deep where he and Zion Tracy have some overlapping skills. Davis is in that category. So for a guy for the future, I think is really good. Special teams can be a part of this. And, if there are injuries and attrition, I do think Davis would be one of the first up to see the field. And he's in a position where I don't think they have a lot of this right now, which is coverage skill in the secondary of being a plus coverage defender in that free safety role. They have the guys we're talking about have a lot of pseudo linebacker abilities. And I think that's important to what they want to build this defense around. But if you're going to do that, you need to have guys on the back end that are lockdown cover players. Davis is in that category, and you put Zion Tracy back there as the pseudo safety as well. But part of, I think, what they want to do with Tracy is because they don't have as many guys that they feel like they can count on. Davis alleviates a little bit of that, and I don't know long-term this year if it's part of the equation or not, but I think for me, it's on the table based on, just what I think of him as a player and the fact that he improved a lot this spring.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And they're going to need guys to fill out that two deep at safety. I think it's as simple as that. And as guys start to fight their way through the pecking order this summer, he certainly seems like a guy we could hear more about. All right, last one on my list. Might upset Steven in the chat. We'll see here in a sec. But again, we're not necessarily talking about the top of the top, the best of the best, the guys that are going to save a season. I put quarterback Connor Berry on here, Division III transfer who came in and basically was the QB1 all spring for Penn State, despite Rocco Beck being able to do more work as spring progressed and will be QB1 come the fall. And, of course, is QB1 despite not doing everything at practice during his final and only spring in State College. It just hard for me to believe Berry didn't get better, getting all the QB1 reps in a FBS program. Acquitted himself mostly well in the blue-white game. Look, I understand that people would say if he is the backup and Penn State has to go to him long-term, they would be in trouble. Yes, that's fine and well. That is the case for almost every FBS team in the country. So you can pile on Connor Berry with that QB2 thought, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to be the backup. And Penn State brought him here to compete for that job. We'll see if Alex Mansky is able to get back into the swing of things later in preseason camp and or the fall and fight for that number 2 job. Otherwise, it's Connor Berry at this point.
Yeah.
And so we heard some good things about the way he was able to command the offense this spring. And, again, he's not going to throw Drew Aller laser ropes to the sideline, 15-yard outs. And he's not going to maybe make all the same decisions a guy like Rocco Becht, who's a 3-year all-conference starter, would make. But seems like he has command of the offense, and if you got to put the backup in at some point, if he is the backup, that's a good place. You got to start there, right? I mean, we all remember, I don't want to keep piling on Taquan Roberson, but the Taquan Roberson game. Yeah. I mean,
I was going to go there. Yeah,
like you can poo-poo a backup quarterback all you want, but there's a difference between at least being able to command the offense and get everyone set and call the right play and hand the ball off if that's all you're going to do, and not be able to do that. And so I thought Connor Berry made some good strides here and thought he was worthy of the inclusion in this conversation about who improved the most this spring.
Yeah, let's say like Wisconsin a couple years ago, and Drew Aller gets hurt. Suddenly you have to go to your backup quarterback. He's not Bo Perbula, but could he get you out of that game? Could he get you, if you have a lead, could he hand the ball off and make select throws, and you could build parts of the offense he's good around, and you could adapt to that midstream? Yes, that is something they could get to. Again, hopefully Alex Mansky is back for camp and is a part of the team, in a big way where he can fight for that backup job, because that's the ideal outcome, right? Is both the quarterbacks you brought in and prioritized are on the team and active. But we've seen worse situations. And so, I think that it's important that Connor Berry was good this year, because it also got them through camp. It also got them so that the offense could get more work as well.
Yes, that's 100% correct. And again, how much of that work did Penn State get? Did it get as much as it would have without Rocco Becht? It's hard, there's no way to quantify it. There just isn't. I mean, I think you can assume at some level that Penn State would have got more I hate it, just sounds derogatory, but quality work with Rocco Becht over Connor Berry in those 11-on-11s and things like that. But I think it's probably true based on history. And so you have that. And at the end of the day, T. Frank, they got the work they were going to get. And keep in mind, that first-team offense was not exactly the look of an offense that Penn State plans to have in the fall. No Donko, no Rapplier, no Chase Soul, no Brett Skeldon. I messed his name up again. That's okay. I mean, the point, there were guys that were out this spring that no matter who QB1 was, we're going to need to work with QB1 later this year regardless. So that's who wraps up my list, T. Frank.
All right. I like it.
All right. Let's tell you about Bearskin. It's a good time for Bearskin, T. Frank. Let's talk Bearskin.
Yep.
It is a miserable day here in Pennsylvania. And so I'm assuming where most of you are, it's probably pretty miserable. So let's talk about Bearskin hoodies. So you've been caught in the rain without a jacket at a game, at a tailgate, on the sideline, walking to your car. You already know the problem. Your rain jacket was at home because it was too bulky to bring. That's where the Bearskin Heavy Storm rain jacket packs into its own pocket, and that comes in. Stash it in your truck, throw it in your bag, keep it in your glove box. It always with you, weighs almost nothing, and the second the sky opens, you pull it out and you're covered. Found that out this morning, T. Frank, when I was running around some errands this morning. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see T. Frank wearing it. It looks good, it feels good, and it keeps you dry. We're talking 20,000 waterproof. That's expedition grade. It's not a flimsy poncho. It's a real taped, seamed, sealed zipper rain jacket that handles sustained downpours and is completely PFAS free. No forever chemicals, which is more than most outdoor brands can say. Like T. Frank and I have talked about, we can sell you on a lot of things. Here's the thing I'll say about this rain jacket, the Bearskin, the Bearskin Heavy Storm rain jacket. When we get these reads for ads, they always try to include a personal touch for you in case you don't have a personal touch that you want to share in an ad read. T. Frank and I both have one. He wore his at the blue-white game and was perfectly fine. I wore mine at the blue-white game and also elsewhere of late, walking the dogs, doing stuff around the house, running in and out of the store and errands. It's unbelievable. I cannot speak highly enough of this product, T. Frank, and you can see it if you're watching on YouTube right now, what it looks like. We can tell you what it feels like, and everything about the Bearskin Heavy Storm rain jacket is as advertised, and quality is unmatched. So right now, Bearskin is running 60% off the Heavy Storm rain jacket with free shipping. 60% off free shipping for something T. Frank and I like. That's a pretty good deal. So text PENN, PENN, all capital letters, to 36912 to take advantage of that. That's PENN to 36912, and they'll send you a link to grab one at 60% off. Keep it in your truck, keep it in your bag. Next time it rains, you're the guy or girl who's ready. Text PENN, PENN, to 36912 today. We love it, T. Frank. This is not BS. It's genuine.
I'm immediately warmer too, so I got the window open, and like Greg said, it's like 50s and raining today, and I immediately feel much more comfortable. The only problem is like with the hood up, and this is nothing wrong with the product specifically, but the color I got, because you can see Greg got a different color. I kind of look like Winnie the Pooh.
I was trying to do the ad read and not laugh at that visual. Yes, you do. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Like, yeah. But here's the thing is like, if you want to be covered and warm and all those things, like you don't want it to be form fitting. You want it to be a little bit bigger. And so like I'm a large torso. I got medium arms. So I got a little bit of the wearing my dad's jacket thing going on, but it's super warm and comfortable. It is very good. I didn't think I would like these. Like, truthfully, I did not think I would like this stuff. And I do. And that's the biggest compliment I can give something is they proved me wrong. Okay.
Yes. Well, the Bearskin Heavy Storm Rain Jacket again. Text PENN, capital letters, all of it, PENN, to 36912. And they'll send you a link to grab one at 60% off. Speaking of numbers, T. Frank, let's get into our second half of the show conversation. And it focuses on Joel Klatt's post-spring top 25 and how the Penn State opponents who are in it, and of course where Penn State is, and also some of the possible 2027 draft eligible guys all factor into this schedule and draft conversation for Penn State as Matt Campbell gets ready to take the field with the Nittany Lions for the first time a little bit later this year. In Joel Klatt's spring top 25, Penn State checked in at number 15. There were only a couple other opponents on the list. One of the things Joel Klatt wrote in his explanation for this, T. Frank, was looking at Penn State, he thought there were probably some rosters who were a little bit more, or were a little bit better than Penn State in terms of what they had. But because of the schedule, he put them at number 15 ahead of some others. So I thought that was an interesting analysis, and this schedule conversation is one that we'll have a little bit today and also throughout the offseason because it is dominating the national story. It is the far and away most talked about Penn State storyline this offseason. Brett McMurphy, you can go check out who they're going to play, but the On3 National Senior College Football Reporter put out his post-spring bowl projections. This morning, he has moved Penn State into the college football playoff. Now, Brett did not put explanations for that, and you can read all of his explanation over at On3. You sign up at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for $1, and your trial access will include access to Brett's article and all the great stuff from On3 and Rivals. I reached out to him to see if we can get him to share his explanation, but I have this odd feeling, T. Frank, and it's not an odd feeling. That is sarcasm, in case my sarcasm font wasn't coming out, that it's going to have a good amount to do with the schedule. That is the talking point for this Penn State out. If you're trying to predict Penn State's 2026 season, you're going to start by saying something about the schedule, something about Penn State being Iowa State East roster-wise, and then make your prediction from there. It's as cookie cutter as it can get right now in terms of the early springs, the post-spring stuff that's coming out. And so that our goal today for this part of the show was to look at some of Penn State's opponents from who are draft prospects and what are these rosters really like? What are these opponents really like? Is it really as bad as it seems like it's being made out to be? And look, you miss Oregon, you miss Indiana, you miss Ohio State. You must start the conversation there. That is a dream draw. However, just because you're not playing those three does not mean you're guaranteed to go 10-2 or 11-1. But this is certainly, again, the kind of push and pull, and some folks are looking at the schedule and thinking it is a guaranteed Penn State walk to 10 wins, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But when you if you drill down on it a bit more, Penn State's going to face some pretty good players this year, T. Frank, that could make some teams do some things a little bit better than maybe it looks like they can right now.
Yeah, so I wanted to attack this from a different way of just looking at the brand and then saying good or bad, right? Because I think some of these middle-of-the-road Big Ten teams in the offseason with NIL could quietly get better, and we wouldn't really know it, and we wouldn't know the matchups or the situations. And also, like quarterbacks, you know? Like, what do we know about the quarterbacks that are on the schedule? I'd say we don't know about some of them. And so what I was thinking about is, earlier this week, I wrote about the players that Penn State could put into the NFL draft next year. And we're going to get to that in just 1 second. I can't. Sorry. I got to take this off.
It's okay. I'm repping Bearskin today. We're good.
Perfect. So Penn State has a certain number of players that I think have talent that could go in the day 1 and day 2 of the NFL draft. And you can frame it as first-round draft picks or whatever, but that have that level of talent. Well, here's the thing. There is this thing called the consensus board, which is it takes into account everyone who does mock drafts, everyone who does big boards. It puts it all together, averages it out, and gives you, here are the top 100 players for 2026 going into the NFL draft, and then you can say what you like and don't like about that. There's already one for 2027 because we've got all of these way too early mock drafts. So if you go through that, who are the consensus?
Drew Aller was in some of them last year. So was exactly. Dennis Sutton. And so was A.J. Harris. Let's not forget about A.J. Harris still in college football.
Yes, huge disappointment. And here's the thing, like, they have the talent. A.J. Harris could have been a top 100 pick, but
no doubt
the results were definitely not there. And you know, some people would have said like it was not due to a lack of talent. Somebody was confused about that last week when I was trying to describe players that maybe weren't playing up to their expectations because of their output. So it is way too early. But we're doing all of this way too early. We're having
the
conversation.
Whole idea, T. Frank.
People are saying, like, this is an easy schedule way too early before we know anything about how these teams are put together. So, with all of that in mind, here are the players on Penn State's schedule that are in the top 100 of the 2027 NFL Draft Consensus Board. Again, signifying talent on these rosters. Not like it's not important that they are the guys that are going to go to the NFL Draft. I know that fans don't care, but this is a signal of like how dangerous these teams could be. So let's go through this list. Quarterback Jaden Maiava is the highest ranked player out of this group for USC. They're coming to Beaver Stadium for the presumably for the whiteout. I keep just assuming that. Minnesota actually has D lineman Anthony Smith is the next guy on the board. Blake Fisher of Michigan, John Henry Daly of Michigan, and then Jair Hill of Michigan are the next three on the board at 62, 64, and 85. Rutgers receiver KJ Duff comes in at number 90. Greg Johnson of Minnesota and then Drake Lindsey, quarterback of Minnesota, round out the list at 94 and 99. So just based on this, Michigan and Minnesota are going to be some tough matchups, Greg. Quarterback Jaden Maiava, anytime you got a quarterback up there, it's also, you know, a huge conversation point. So Michigan and Minnesota have 3 apiece on this list. Rutgers and USC have 1 apiece. But that leaves the rest of the rosters that they're facing off of this list. So I would say, yes, it is a relatively easy schedule in a vacuum of the talent perception right now. And that's really what we're going on when we're talking about this. So I think it's an interesting way, different lens to look at this conversation about. So if you think Penn State's going 10-2, and 2 of those losses are going to be Washington and Michigan on the road. Minnesota's a tricky one. You know, Minnesota, I think, is maybe more talented than people give them credit for. We'll see what happens when they get to that point. But, yeah, I think that was the biggest thing for me, Greg, was seeing that Minnesota had 3 players in the top 100 of the consensus board.
So that was the big surprise to me, too. Anthony Smith is a monster. He's from Shippensburg, PA guy, who went to Minnesota and has thrived. And I think most impressively, T. Frank has not left Minnesota despite undoubtedly being able to cash in elsewhere if he so wanted to. I don't have any question in my mind that he would have been able to cash in elsewhere with a big NIL deal to rush the passer for somebody else, including even possibly Penn State, who knows? But never interested in leaving Minnesota. A lot of credit to him. And he is a fantastic player that Penn State will have to account for. You mentioned the quarterback situation at USC. The Trojans are getting a lot of buzz right now, a lot of buzz. And I don't know if it's justified buzz yet or not. I haven't spent enough time digging into them. That'll come a little bit later this month. But certainly they will not be an easy out, even though they come to Penn State. You know, and so you look at this list, and then Michigan is just the one I struggle with the most because Kyle Whittingham has had great success over the years in college football. But I look at that roster and I look at Penn State's roster, and you just almost throw your hands up in the air when trying to make an early prediction on that game because there's just so much you're just not sure of. I mean, we'll make predictions at some point. Right? Don't you worry. We'll make them. But it just makes it challenging to get into it. So, T. Frank, can I tell everyone about BetMGM quick, and then that'll segue us into Penn State and the win total and what its roster might mean about that?
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's do that. All right, to tell you about who's on that list for Penn State, I first want to tell you about BetMGM. You'll see why in a second. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code ON3, all capital letters ON3, and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code ON3 ON3. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you will receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure you use bonus code ON3 when you sign up, and once you do, with the BetMGM Hat Trick Jackpot, you have the chance to win your share of $10,000 in bonus bets during each playoff game. Just place an anytime goal scorer wager, and if your guy scores 3+ goals during that game, you will win a share of $10,000 in bonus bets. So BetMGM Best Bets segment and how this all ties together is this. So I was clicking on BetMGM this morning as we were getting ready for the show. As always, we do Best Bets from BetMGM on Wednesday. And I looked at the Penn State win total, and it was, we talked about this, I think, a couple weeks ago, but the juice went pretty significantly towards the under. It's still 9.5 wins in the regular season, but it's now minus 200, which tells me that BetMGM might soon be moving it to 8.5, which would be juiced towards the over. Not quite that extremely, but it would be juiced towards the over. And so I wonder if, number one, this schedule talk that we're having here is catching the eye of some people, and people are wondering if maybe this schedule isn't as easy as it seems. But then number two, are people wondering about how talented the Penn State roster is to deal with this schedule, whether it's easy or not. So going back to the consensus board conversation, Penn State doesn't have many guys on it.
Yeah.
At least the one I looked at, and I'm pretty sure it was the same one. It's not that they don't have guys that could be on it, but right now, there's not a lot.
So this is, Z-Man asked this in the chat, and I have this prepared for you. So this takes into, this graphic is going to be about the teams that are not on Penn State's schedule, and then Penn State's total. So Penn State has one player in the top 100, and that's Marcus Neal at 85 overall. So when we get to this in just a minute, we're going to talk about the players that could be in the top 100. I did not include Marcus Neal in this because he's a junior. I only can include guys that are redshirt juniors or higher in eligibility, just because like you could have included half the roster in terms of physical talent. So Penn State has one in Marcus Neal, and this is what they missed of the teams that are in the top 100 with players on the consensus board. Oregon has 10. So that's a little silly.
That's why everyone keeps saying that Penn State misses them on the schedule. They certainly did fortunate to not deal with them, yes. Yeah,
that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous amount. And like guys that we saw last year, Amari Washington, Dante Moore, some of these guys that are super talented. Indiana has 5, and Ohio State has 4. So Ohio State actually has fewer than I was expecting. Now, the caveat here is both Dylan Raiola and Dante Moore are on the consensus board, and that's stupid. That's not going to happen. They're not going to have 2 quarterbacks drafted in the top 100 next year. So that's going to sort itself out. But still, Oregon leading the way with 10. Penn State has 1. So that is, I think, the biggest disparity in the perception of Penn State's talent and the perception of its high-end ability on this roster for next season. Whether or not that's true, the guys who would garner attention are not on anyone's radar right now.
Right. And I think that that's okay. That's not the end of the world. Is it preferable?
Yeah.
No. Is it the end of the world? Also no. But we'll see how it plays out. I think when you look at this list of guys you put together, T. Frank, and again, you can go check out T. Frank's full analysis at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Just $1 to try us out. I can't think of many things in the world. I heard something on the radio this morning. You can get those big pounder cans of Arizona sweet tea for $1 still. I don't know if that's true, but anyway, I know it is true. You can get BWI Blue White Illustrated for $1. So check us out. But if you want to go read his full analysis, I think you'll feel better about this conversation because I can imagine some Penn State fans out there may be a little queasy after listening to this, T. Frank. But when you look at the guys who could be in there that you put together, I don't think Penn State fans should feel as concerned as the previous 3 minutes of this segment may have felt.
Yeah, so there's a good amount of guys with upward trajectory and talent. So what we have right now in this top 100 conversation is prestige and production, right? So talent and recruiting, ranking, playoff exposure, things like that. Like, so how does your name come up? Your name comes up because we've seen you do it, right? And you're draft eligible for this upcoming season. So you're going to have a lot of those guys fall off because they might not have good senior years. They might not declare for the draft. You know, whatever reason it will change. And one of the reasons it will change is guys who are not on the radar for one reason or another can join that conversation. And so there's a list of 5 players that I think can be in the top 100. There's more, but these are the guys that I think have the obvious talent, and I know exactly how they get there in terms of being a potential first-round draft pick for some of these guys to being a guy on day 1 or day 2. So here are those 5 players for Penn State and some of the reasons we can go through as to why they aren't on the list and why they would be after this year. So going anywhere other than Anthony Donko would be, irresponsible on my part to start these things. And these aren't in order necessarily. Chase Soule,
but that one is
receiver.
That one is.
That one is. Yes, that one is. Tony Rojas, Davian Collins, and Ben Bramer, to me, are the 5 guys that have the easiest path to being potential top 100 picks and being in this conversation by the end of the year. So Penn State could go from 1 to 6 if all of this works out. Now, if that all of it works out, then they are going to be a college football playoff team, because they will have the talent on the roster at the right positions to produce and to create plays. So a couple of the guys here, one of the reasons that Anthony Donko is not in this conversation is because he's been hurt a lot. He's also been bouncing around between positions, whether he was playing guard last year, whether he was playing tackle, on an offensive line that struggled, so wasn't really getting a ton of attention. But his highlights, when he flashes, he's more explosive than Venga Ioane. Now, that doesn't matter necessarily when it comes to is he going to be a better offensive lineman. But the ceiling is theoretically higher, and when he is in his bag as a run blocker, he is as dominant of a guy of just mauling people, taking dudes. He has the best highlights I've seen of all of the Penn State offensive linemen. Vega is just really good at, and I shouldn't say that, he's got a couple where he just puts the dude into the bleachers. Anthony Donko has some of those classic line up and pile drive a guy like the blind side, 3 to 10 yards downfield. So if he plays right tackle and is healthy the entire time and produces, he's going to be in the conversation for at minimum a second-round pick, if not a first-round draft pick, depending on how good his season is. I think this offense also sets up really well for him because there's elements of it that are like last year, but it's a more cohesive plan and similar to what they were doing at the end of last year. And then the other guy on offense that I'll just, wrap this particular thought up here is Chase Soule, who was a Colorado receiver, recruited to Colorado. His coach gets fired. He's off to ECU, to kind of go to a different level. Then he gets to Iowa State and he gets hurt. So this is a guy who was a Power 5 prospect at one point, had to go down a level, come back up a level, and then last year was a really exciting player for Iowa State, and then got hurt in fall camp and had a rough year. But athletically, talent-wise, I know you talked to him and you talked to Kishif Moore. This is a guy that they think has a massive upside to his ability.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you look at somebody asked in the chat about Rapplier, and I think just tap the brakes there until he puts a full healthy season together.
We can get to him in a second.
Yeah. The thing with Donko is to the same kind of idea. Got to stay healthy, got to be on the field, and Penn State has to put him at its best position, which it sounds like they intend to do. So he is, without question, the place to start this list.
Yeah. And so let's talk about the tight ends. Tony Rojas, the obvious thing, he's injured. So that's that. We'll get to Davian Collins here at the end, but let's talk about the tight ends because everyone's going to be, hairy eyeball at the fact that I don't have Andrew Rapplier on this list. He is on my list of guys who can be in this conversation for sure. 2 things about Andrew Rapplier I think are important in this context. It is usage pattern to me is how I separated these things because Ben Bramer is going to be the downfield threat in this offense. He's going to be the guy that lines up at pseudo wide receiver in the slot, running deep overs, running post routes, running seam routes, and he's going to get those big catches. The NFL selected 8 tight ends on day 2 of the NFL draft, which was just an incredible run. Everyone is following the Rams and 49ers and the vogue of the Bills going into these 12 and 13 personnel packages, so everyone wants to load up on tight ends. Ben Bramer provides you maybe not the blocking, but he provides you the more rare opportunity of a guy that can catch the ball and be explosive down the field. So I valued that asset in this conversation with the thought of the draft in mind. Now, if we're talking about who's the best all-around tight end, it's Andrew Rapplier. But as Greg mentioned, health, and then what is his role? And that's, to me, what I don't know just yet. Is he going to be doing a lot of the dirty work? Are they going to ask him to do a lot of the blocking and underneath routes? And is he going to have to catch and run his way to victory? Because if we're talking about splash plays and high value things, I think Andrew Rappleyea is a day 2 tight end as well. But like, if he snuck into round 4 and decided to leave this year, that's one thing. If he wanted to come back, by the way, for his redshirt senior season and be the guy, that's also an option. So that's why I don't have him in that clear top 100 group of the top 5. Also, when doing these things, it's more fun to piss people off and put Andrew Rappleyea outside of that and make some hard decisions. And that's why I landed where I did.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's going to be an interesting conversation, kind of going to maybe tied in to A.J. Harris, not exactly. But even guys who have success may choose to take one more year in college because of the NIL situation. If they're on the brink of this top 100 conversation or maybe a little bit further down. So guys have a chance to play themselves into it, just like guys have a chance to play themselves out of it. You wrap this list with Davian Collins, really good pick. An underrated part of this Penn State defense. We spent a lot of time this offseason talking about a lot of parts of this defense. He's not one of the guys whose names come up quite a bit. And I think that when you look at what he's capable of, he probably should come up a little bit more.
He is the team's number 1 corner at this point. He's a guy that has NFL coverage skills. This is the nuance that nobody cares about. So I always get in trouble with talking about the things that fans don't actually care about because they care about the result. So let's talk about the process here for a second. He is a razor's edge from being one of these top 100 players. And I have him here, but like, he could also be undrafted. So that there's a boomer bust here.
Right.
His ability to get to the catch point is unmatched of the guys that I've studied at Penn State. He is almost always there contesting the catch. The problem is, over the last 2 seasons, he's allowed an 85% completion percentage. That is the worst I've ever seen. And it is almost a yips sort of thing. So if he fixes that, he is an NFL corner. He's an aggressive tackler. He's willing to go and fight to get to the football. I think he plays with high effort, high intensity. He's a good instincts cover corner with really, really, really good man coverage abilities. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but I think he plays bigger than his frame most of the time until you get to the catch point. So if he allows 80% again this year, then forget everything I've said. But if he cuts it down under 50, if it's less than a 50-50 ball, and he proves that he's gotten better with his instincts of when to jump, how to get in front of the player, and the strength to fight through the guy's arms, then I think he's a guy that you could talk about in this top 100 conversation. And then finally, the last guy I want to mention, just as who could make it into the conversation, is Zion Tracy, another guy who's got NFL skills from a speed and movement standpoint. But nickel corners are not necessarily super valuable. Guys that in certain systems are not full-time starters. Tracy, playing the nickel his whole career, will be a guy who makes it to the NFL. But I have no idea when that is. So like 4th, 5th round wouldn't surprise me. 3rd round wouldn't surprise me. So if we're talking just top 100 players, he's right on that bubble with Andrew Rappleyea of his season will determine where he goes in the draft, which is true of all of these guys, but some of them have positional abilities or talents that make them, I put them higher on this list because of those things.
All right. Well, you heard it here about the Penn State opponents that could make the top 100 in the NFL draft and also who could for Penn State's roster. And it's a good way to take an early look at Penn State's win total at BetMGM, 8.5 or 9.5 at the moment, juiced pretty heavily towards the under.
See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, and 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer now for new customers only. Subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are not withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 7 days. In partnership with Kansas Crossings Casino and Hotel.
All right, T. Frank, we're coming down the home stretch of another edition of BWI Live. We talked players who improved this spring. We took a look at Penn State's 2026 schedule and opponents they will face. Any final thoughts as you get ready for a Thursday BWI Live recruiting show?
Oh, yeah, I'm just reloading for the recruiting show because there's a lot of stuff going on there. Quarterback is unresolved, and that is making everyone go nuts. And so we're going to be getting into that. and of course talking about some of the commitments coming up and looking ahead at May. There's been so much information and so many things that we have had to get to that we haven't even been able to kind of look ahead at to, official visit schedules and things like that when it comes to the next step for Penn State. We did a little bit of the preview of where the coaches might be going and all that stuff and how this calendar changes, but like the actual dates everyone needs to know about, official visits are coming soon. And so there's a lot of important stuff coming up for Penn State recruiting, which is why you should subscribe here to the YouTube channel. Also got a couple of fun things in mind we're workshopping. I can't talk about them just yet, but some guests and some topics that I think a lot of people will be interested in. So make sure you subscribe for all that great stuff.
All right, please do, both here on the YouTube channel and over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Promised a little bit earlier that I'd hear from Brett McMurphy about why he has Penn State in the college football playoff. I heard from him, so you'll be able to check that out later today at BWI, and everything from T. Frank, Ryan, Nate, and Sean Fitz as we get ready to continue this post-spring conversation and look ahead to all the recruiting and team news that is to come moving forward in 2026. For Thomas Frank Carr, I'm Greg Pickel. The guys will be back tomorrow on BWI Live, the Thursday recruiting show. We'll talk to you again next Wednesday. Until then, have